Good afternoon, and once again, welcome to today's Maniac Talk. This is the last one this year, so we'll reconvene again next year in January. So today, it's a privilege, it's an honor to introduce our speaker, Michael Kurylo. He's a senior research scientist with the University Space Research Association. Mike was born at the shadows of the Second World War. Mike could have been a cowboy or a farmer, but he ended up becoming an atmospheric scientist studying global change and the trends in the abundances of atmospheric constituents such as the ozone and other climate-related trace gases. And later, he transitioned to program management and international environmental policy. He spent more than 3 decades at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, but half of that period, he was an interagency detail to NASA headquarters as a manager of NASA congressionally mandated upper atmospheric research program. He's been around for a while. Over the years, he received many awards and recognitions from the Department of Commerce, of NASA, NOAA, EPA, and most recently, he was inducted into the National Institute of Standard Portrait Gallery of Distinguished Scientists, Engineers, and Administrators. In other words, if you go to NIST headquarters here in Gaithersburg, you see Mike's picture on the wall. It's a big honor, actually. Today, he is going to walk us through different stages of his life, but more importantly, he has some good advice that can inform younger colleagues that anything is possible if you apply yourself and are not afraid to take the road less traveled. Please, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome our speaker, Michael Kurylo.
Well, thank you, Charles. Business with the NIST portrait gallery is rather interesting because through all my years there were a lot of administrators who wanted to hang me, and they finally found a way. So, at any rate, I hope this story, as much as I enjoyed putting it together, I mean, when Charles asked me to do this, I really was rather reluctant. I felt it was going to take a lot more effort than I really wanted to put into it. But when I got into it, it was really kind of amazing, to me at any rate. I had never really looked at my life, from cradle, well, not quite to grave, I'm still here, but I never really looked at it, over that full spectrum. And when I finished, I was actually pretty amazed that I managed to survive at times and actually transition in the way that I had. So it's a story about a journey. It's a journey that started off in post-World War II housing projects. It took me to a rural Connecticut neighborhood in central Connecticut, and eventually to a career in atmospheric science. The path itself was very unpredictable, and you'll see at times was diverted by some near tragic events. Obviously, you'll look at this and say, boy, there was a lot of serendipity, and there probably was, in terms of doors being opened when they had to. Perhaps I was just in the right place at the right time. The journey actually began without any real destination. You'll see that. And indeed, as I said, the risks along the way may indeed have been mitigated by good fortune or perhaps even providence. There'll be an element of that. But more often than not, decisions that I made were influenced by a number of people who I just can't thank enough. Without their advice and counsel and guidance, I may have chosen a different path at different forks in the road and never arrived at where I am today. I started off, and this was really a fun part, to examine a little bit of my own ancestral heritage to see, okay, does this explain my behavior? Pete, my wife, will say nothing explains my behavior, but I thought I'd look back on the roots. And I'm sure that you're going to look at this and say, this is a Forrest Gump story. But I'm hoping that the veracity of what I'm about to tell you could really demonstrate what might happen if one really takes the road less traveled. So let's start off taking a look at my ancestry. On my father's side, I was actually able to find out where my name came from. I'm the third, my son's the fourth, so Michael Kurylo Sr. was born in Krylovka, Ukraine. He had an older brother, Peter, and this was common for people who were born in the Ukraine in the late 1800s, who was pressed into service as a Cossack under Tsar Nicholas II. Very interesting that we were able to actually find this out. Peter actually arranged for my grandfather's immigration to the United States. My grandmother was born in a very small village, quite close to the town or village that my grandfather was born in. They didn't know one another at the time. They immigrated separately as teenagers to the United States. They managed to meet in Hartford, Connecticut, where they got married. And then they were traveling by train through Connecticut onto New Jersey to look for work. And my grandfather was actually impressed when the train passed by this church with a very large steeple. It happened to be in Wallingford, Connecticut. And he was a rather religious man, and he told my grandmother, any town that's proud enough to have a church with a steeple that large, I'd like to live in. It was rather prophetic at the time. They ended up in New Jersey, and, you know, I don't know if years ago you ever drove the New Jersey Turnpike. I mean, there was a pretty good stench there. Well, that's why. They worked at a pig farm. However, my grandfather began working in a munitions factory during World War I, at the outbreak of World War I, but shortly after beginning work there, he was severely injured when a crane dropped a weapon that they had prepared on him and several other workers. You know, there wasn't workman's comp back then. So it took him a year to recuperate. He had no job. He had a wife. So he went back to Connecticut to try to find work. And he ended up working at an orchard until he eventually found a permanent job at the International Silver Company in Wallingford, Connecticut. On my mother's side, things are also very peculiar. My grandfather, Jacob, was one of 13 children, and he was the only one not to be born stillborn. I can't imagine what it was like for his mother to give birth to 13 children and only have one of them live. Very common for young boys at that time, they were sent out to be apprentices for various tradespeople, and very coincidentally, he was sent to be an apprentice for a bootmaker for Tsar Nicholas II. It's just fascinating to see that connection. My grandmother was born in a very poor farming family in Minsk. As with my father's parents, they immigrated separately as teenagers. My grandmother was quite tall, very unusual during that time. She was well over 6 feet tall, exceptionally thin when she got to Ellis Island, and she was judged to be of questionable health in their precursory exam. And a chalk mark was made on her arm, and she was sent to a line different from the line to which her shipmates had been sent. She did a little inquiring of the friends that she had traveled with, and there was concern raised that she might not be allowed entry. So my grandmother, doing what she had to do, she simply wiped the mark off her arm and changed lines. They later met, were married, and opened up a bakery, just coincidentally, in Wallingford, where they raised their 4 children. And you can see a picture of the 4 children there. So my hometown was Wallingford, Connecticut. And in doing this, I actually found a rather fascinating history that was published in 1870 by this gentleman. It's really fascinating to read the story of the town. But to be short, it's a very old town. It was established in 1670. You can read this. It was purchased from the Indians. There were a couple famous native sons, Lyman Hall, who was a signature of the Declaration of Independence, and Moses Yale Beach, who actually is best known for starting the Associated Press. I have memories of some rather old town features, and one of them that a number of us always used to go to was Mr. Foot's ice cream parlor. Well, let's take a look at my parents. My father's pictured here at age 4 with his younger sister. My father never went to high school. There are stories about why that happened, but he dropped out of high school and later entered a trade school. It was a common occurrence of sons of laborers during that time frame. And he later became an expert toolmaker and machinist at that same international silver company in Wallingford. My mother, pictured here at the age of 6, worked in the family bakery, but again, very common for girls growing up in the Great Depression. They were forced to leave high school to take on house cleaning and laundry jobs to help support their families. My parents were married shortly before the start of World War II and lived with relatives. Shortly thereafter, he entered the U.S. Army. He became one of the most traveled servicemen in town history. He started off serving in India, but ended up actually with a quartermaster corps in Iran, where they were guarding oil pipelines to ensure delivery of petroleum products to the Allied forces. Fortunately for me, he was granted leave in 1944 for a couple months, perhaps longer. He was certainly there for one night. He was recalled to his unit shortly thereafter and didn't return until 3 months after I was born. Well, you hear a lot today about how our veterans are treated. Things were a hell of a lot better at the end of World War II. This is where I lived for my first 5 years of my life. This was a housing project which was constructed in 1944. It was a temporary place to hopefully relieve the housing shortage associated with the return of U.S. servicemen from World War II. For 5 years, I lived in one of these cinder block dwellings, consisted only of about 200 square feet, 2 rooms. That was it. That 200 square feet did not include the coal bin that was out front. Nevertheless, we made the best of what we had. Here are some pictures taken there. You can see the inside of the house, cinder block, uninsulated. But I had a number of very early recollections. Like I say, we made the best of what we had. I can remember listening to the Lone Ranger on the radio, and when the first neighbor got a television, I actually remember all the kids would go over there to watch the Howdy Doody show. I remember as a little boy running barefoot through the dirt streets, chasing the ice wagon, pulled by a horse in the summer, and the iceman would cut off a sliver of ice and hand it to the kids to suck on. That was our ice cream cone for the summer. A lot of people didn't have electricity or didn't have electrical refrigerators. You can see that we actually were fortunate. We did. My father used to deliver blocks of ice to the next door neighbor. She was a widow. And it was cheaper. Well, she couldn't afford the ice for her ice box, quite frankly, so my father would get it for her. And one of my first recollections was right here. I had gone to her door to tell her that my father was bringing the block of ice, came running around the coal bin. My father had already been carrying the block of ice, and at that height, I went headfirst into the corner of the block of ice. It shattered my left eye socket, knocked the eye in, and my father thought I was dead. I just fell. He saw his son lying on the ground in a pool of blood. That stayed with my father, and you'll see for the next number of years, and led him to want to leave these projects. But I also remember chasing the rag man. This was a guy who pulled his own wagon and would purchase resaleable items from us kids, for nickels and pennies. And that meant a lot when we were back then. We were very poor. My mother became quite ill when I was 3.5, and I was sent to, it was called the Putnam School. I believe that it started as a high-level daycare for children of servicemen. Going to this place, and I took this picture this summer when we went up there. Absolutely magnificent house. And I remember coming from, you saw where we lived, to a house like this, how fascinating it was. But it was more than a daycare. At the age of 3.5, we were being taught to sing French songs. We were doing math, reading, and turns out I was performing at a second grade level by the time I was 5 years old and left that school. Well, fortunately for us, the Hillcrest Housing Project was torn down in 1950. The residents were moved to another subsidized project, a lot better. We now had 800 square feet, and there were now 5 of us sharing 4 rooms. We were lucky. We were actually assigned a single-family house, whereas others were put in smaller multiplex units, which weren't a hell of a lot better than what we had just moved from. I moved from the Putnam School, entered public school. This is my first school, Whittlesey Avenue Public School. Because of the education I had received at this Putnam school, they did some testing and they wanted me to start in the second grade, but my parents said, he's 5 years old. I mean, let's be real. And they insisted that I not go beyond the first grade. Of course, you'll see a picture later on that shows how bored I was. We didn't have playgrounds back then, and so our recreation consisted of playing on the construction sites and actually having mock battles between the kids from the 2 housing areas. It's interesting. These kids were my friends. They soon were no longer my friends because there was a residential inequality, a feeling of residential inequality that began to fester amongst the adults, and it was passed on to the children. And my parents' determination to move away from the projects became even stronger when they found me lying in one of these construction sites, knocked unconscious during one of those rock fights. The back of my head was actually split open. So my parents bought some land in the North Farms area of Wallingford and built a house there. This is a scene not much different than today of a typical farmhouse in that section. This was the house that they built. Our living space increased to 5 rooms, 1,300 square feet, and God, it was great. I had my own bedroom, first time. Before we even moved there, we had planted a 1/4-acre vegetable garden, which I worked in, and that provided a lot of produce for canning. I mean, that was very important when you were on a very limited income. This was a very rural area. Most of our neighbors were farmers. There were small sheep farms and large dairy farms. We didn't even have a real street address. Everything was addressed to people up there. It was RFD number 1 North Farms Road. And RFD simply stands for Rural Free Delivery. I left, because of the move, I left Whittlesey Avenue School, and I entered an elementary school named after this gentleman, Moses Yale Beach. And I did that with my new friends. And you're in a small town, and I remember my first day of school, I had this teacher, and everybody feared, God, I hope you don't get her. Well, it was Miss Sutton. It wasn't Mrs., it was Miss. I mean, she, for good reason. And her first words to me, Mike Kurylo, well, I hope you're a much better student than your father and your uncle were. Well, for me, this was nirvana. I mean, living in the country just provided a wonderful opportunity for me to foster new interests. I developed a love for the rural life and the carefree pastimes it offered. I spent many after-school hours working on one of the largest dairy farms in Connecticut. It was owned by the parents of one of my best friends. And we really did everything there. I could tell lots of stories about the fun that we had, but most interesting, I actually started driving a truck at the age of 11. They needed somebody during the hay gathering, and I wasn't big enough to be throwing the bales onto the truck. And my friend's father said, well, you do know how to drive, don't you? And I said, well, no, not really. And I remember him saying, my God, what's this world coming to? Here's an 11-year-old kid who doesn't know how to drive. Well, my friend, Al, told him, he says, well, Dad, he says, I have been teaching Mike how to shift the tractor and all, and so he can, shift everything. And so his father said, well, you're big enough. You reach the pedals, you can steer. He told me what to do, and he says, hop in. You know, it frees up one of the guys. So I learned how to drive. I loved just riding my bike on farm roads with my dog, fishing in the streams and ponds. And then we would take a big leather strap. Some of the farms raised steers for meat. We'd go out and try riding the steers, and occasionally even the cows. Fortunately, the parents that owned the dairy farms didn't find us doing this, or that leather strap might have found another use. But all of that made me more determined to own a horse. My best friend had one, and so I started earning money doing lawn mowing and gardening for neighbors, delivering newspapers throughout the farms, and caddying at the local country club. Here's a picture of my sisters, Linda and Susan, on our front steps. And you can tell the enjoyment that I had just by this picture of me in the front yard with my dog. Well, my parents did have educational priorities. And you know, despite not having graduated from high school for either of them, but perhaps even because they didn't, they placed a very high regard on my own education. And my mother, I wasn't very happy about it, but she arranged for me to be tutored by some neighbors for whom I had been doing gardening work. He was a retired professor at Yale, and his wife had been a translator of Italian literature in the library there. And I remember going over there, being drilled in math and being given, you know, books or chapters to read and being asked to write an essay about particular topics. Didn't really like it, but the carrot was horse ownership. So I went through with it. But my mother had this vision that I was going to attend the Choate School, but only by getting a scholarship, because the tuition there today is $50,000 for this high school. Few kids growing up in Wallingford ever even thought of going to Choate. We called the kids who went there Choaties. These were children from what we thought were very elite and wealthy out-of-state families, and in fact, one student who had just graduated at that time and was elected most likely to succeed from his class was John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Well, I didn't get into to Choate, but unfortunately, at least I thought so at the time, it didn't result in my being able to attend Lyman Hall, remember him, signature of the Declaration of Independence, public high school with my friends. But I did get a horse. Attending Fairfield Prep was an affordable option, but I had to shovel out a stall at 6 o'clock in the morning in order to drive with my parents. They both were working in the factory at the time. They'd go into work at 7 a.m., and they would drop me off about a mile from the railroad station so that I could make the 7:30 train. Thinking back, I just wonder if shoveling horse manure at that hour in the morning wasn't in some way a preparation for the life I would later lead at NASA headquarters. But this may be something we edit out later. I was concerned about the impact on local friendships and restricting social activities, but this was really short-lived. Obviously, new friendships grew, and you're going to see there were new, unanticipated social benefits at home. Here's a picture of me that they took on our first day getting off the train. You want to think about a deer in the headlights. I mean, there it is right there. And there are relatively few pictures that I actually have of me and my horse, but this is one of the early ones. So what were those social benefits? Well, belonged to a 4-H club and became the president, and here, this was the operative word right there, of a co-ed chapter of a 4-H club. And, we just go on long weekend rides through the farmlands, forests, and streams. But I really got into competitive riding. I started off in Western performance classes, but I transitioned to the thrill of actually racing competitions, barrel, pole, flag ascent, and I became quite accomplished. Obviously that was fueled by a little bit of a daredevil attitude, a feeling of invincibility. And those accomplishments led to thoughts that, boy, this might be the career I want to pursue. I did that for a couple years, but they turned out to be rather short-lived because later on, I was in a racing exhibition. I fell beneath my horse. The cinch strap had loosened up. Saddle went sideways. My foot went through the stirrup. I was caught underneath and fell underneath the back hooves of the horse. Was kicked in the head. Third knockout. And only avoided serious injury because the horse had been previously trained as a roping horse. I don't know if any of you have watched rodeos where the rider will rope a calf, and the moment that rider hops off the horse, that horse comes to a complete stop. So I was only underneath my horse for maybe 1.5, 2 strides. And when he felt me off his back, he came to a complete stop. It may have saved my life. But nevertheless, I still maintained a very strong interest in a rural life. Now, my initial displeasure and attentiveness at prep led to my introduction to something called JUG. Now, how many people here, don't say it, but just raise your hands. Do you know what JUG is? Yeah, you obviously went to a parochial school. JUG was the acronym. I joined the world of acronyms here. JUG was a name for detention, and it was simply called Justice Under God. That was what they call it. If we have time at the end, I'll tell you a story about my first day at JUG, which was probably not long after my first day at prep, and how I found out that it sure as hell wasn't a study hall. Okay, nevertheless, I managed to excel in the sciences and math, but really hadn't given much thought to any type of a career. It was easy for me to obtain what I thought was adequate, B grades in that. And if it hadn't been for the influence of 2 teachers, both of them Jesuits, one was a priest at the time, the other was in the seminary, I probably wouldn't have advanced. Lefty, before entering the seminary, played semi-pro football. He was a huge guy. And he didn't believe in JUG because he had a 1-inch thick paddle that he thought could leave a more lasting and immediate impression. And I can tell you that that led to my rechanneling a disinterest in prepping for a national Latin exam, and surprisingly, I ended up winning a silver medal. And Lefty told the class, this is more paraphrased, that I hope this has been a lesson for everyone to see what can be achieved if you only apply yourself. He may have said something like, if this schmuck can do it, God, you guys really can. Al taught me chemistry, and he viewed me as pretty much an underachiever, not surprising. But I hadn't even thought about going to college at the time. And he said, what's the name of the school here? I said, Fairfield Prep. He said, no, what's the full name of the school? I said, well, Fairfield College Preparatory School. He said, okay, well, what do you think that means? And I said, well, I don't see how my parents could even afford to send me to college. I mean, it's a struggle for me to come here. And he told me, right here, maybe if you worked a little bit harder, your parents wouldn't have to pay. Well, with that advice, I improved my focus and ended up with a full tuition scholarship at Boston College. I decided to major in chemistry. Happened to be something I enjoyed the most. I still had to work summer jobs to help pay for things. Unfortunately, Boston College was 150 miles from home, and that absence over a long period of time with my father working long hours in a factory necessitated the sale of my horse. And I was really distraught. I perceived this at the end of some of my most enjoyable activities, but it had a positive effect in that I was more committed to excel in college in hopes that, although I still didn't have a certain career, I might be able to re-enable some of those past activities that I enjoyed so much. And then, the summer of 1963 provided me with a new social opportunity. I was working that summer in a small steel mill, and I met an 18-year-old girl in the sales department who had just graduated from a 1-year secretarial school. I very soon after that asked her for a date, apparently 11 years after we first met. And I told you about the Whittlesey Avenue Elementary School. Here in the 2nd grade, you see a picture. Here's Mary, and this happy face right here. is me. Obviously, she didn't have that picture at hand when she agreed to the date, or she might never have done so. So, what happened at Boston College? Well, again, another person who really ended up helping me refocus my path. Dick Timmons, in teaching us, would take literature articles, right? Newly published literature articles, and he would give us, the introduction, all of the preliminary information and the data, and ask us to write the results and conclusions. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating. It was the first real exposure that I had to something like that. And so I started thinking about, maybe there's a career as a research chemist. And Dick's emphasis, he said, if you really want to do that, you're going to have to get an advanced degree. And that really led to a path adjustment, which was reinforced by another event that you're about to see. But there was something else. The senior thesis was required for people who had been labeled scholars of the college or were members of the honors program. I was in the latter group. A few select members of the honors program, along with all the scholars of the college, were offered an opportunity to spend 6 weeks in the summer between their junior and senior year doing original research in support of their senior thesis. I initially declined that opportunity because I had to work in the summer. And there was no way I could take that time off, even though, they were going to pay me for the living expenses up there, but that wasn't going to cover the work that I had to do to help my parents support my room and board and other expenses the following year. Well, the chemistry department got together and decided to offer me a job that was typically offered to graduate students during my senior year. And what they then did is, rather than pay me, they made arrangements with the university that my room and board would be for free during my senior year if I took on that position. So I originally was planning to work with Dick Timmons, but he ended up leaving BC and went to Catholic University here in Washington. I ended up doing thesis research with Neil Jurinsky, led to my first peer-reviewed publication. But I was already fostering a 2-year relationship with this girl that I had met at the steel mill. And, you're away at college 9 months of the year. It's kind of hard to have that long-distance relationship. And here now I was going to spend half the summer away. So I did what any red-blooded American boy would do. I didn't have a ring, so I guess it would be a pre-proposal. And we ultimately became engaged that Christmas. So I mentioned here another event which enforced my decision away from what I'd been thinking of doing, and that's here. I'll let you read this. This is summarized from the newspaper article, April 14th. Gordon and I carried 6 calves and released 80 cows from the burning building. The result of the fire was that it was the second such loss of that dairy farm, and they no longer had been able to afford insurance, and they basically had to abandon dairying. This right-hand photo, rather scary, was taken when Gordon and I were still in the barn. We were unable to free a cow that had fallen and was trapped in its stanchion, and we shot it to death rather than allow it to burn. We've managed to get our way out of the barn, which collapsed only about 2 minutes after we exited. So that changed my view of farming a little bit. But in 1966, this was a very memorable year. I graduated from Boston College, and this would never have occurred without my parents' inspiration and guidance and the values that they instilled on me. Shortly thereafter, this incredible companion joined me for the rest of my journey. And here's me, Mary, at our wedding. So with Dick's, I kept in touch with Dick Timmons at Catholic University and made a decision to go there for graduate school, based on his counseling and the fact that I had been spared what I thought was a 4th time. I ended up at Catholic University with Dick rather than going to Ohio State, where I had been recruited by this unknown guy, unknown to me at the time, Jack Calvert, who most of the people in chemistry know as an internationally acclaimed photochemist. And over the years, Jack and I have, he's now deceased, but we have shared many a beer and laughed about the fact that I turned him down. It was a case of being a big fish in a small pond versus a small fish in a big pond. I started doing, and this advice, there were two guys. I mentioned the scholars of the college at BC. There were two people, one a physics major, one a chemistry major, who I was very close to. One of them was Al Wagner, who became a very well-known theoretician at Argonne National Lab. And the other was a physics major who, his name is Ernie Moniz. Turns out is our Secretary of Energy. But the three of us used to hang around a lot together during that time. But they were very helpful in advising me on what to do. I started off doing some traditional photochemistry. I wasn't really satisfied with the fact that I couldn't see an immediate impact of the research. And I dropped the project after I suffered temporary UV blindness due to some mistakes in shielding. And I actually considered briefly the NASA astronaut candidate program. I was attending graduate school on a NASA fellowship. And all the people on those fellowships were sent advertisements about this candidate program. And so I said, maybe that's what I should be doing. Well, Dick didn't think so, so he challenged me to institute a new research effort at Catholic University, which was facilitated by the arrival of a new ESR spectrometer. And so the work itself would involve an application that was being pursued right up the road here at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab. Dick told me, give him a call, find out what it's going to take. So I called up Art Westenberg. He had just published a review of the application, and he was very responsive to my inquiries, suggested I meet with one of his research colleagues, Newman DeHaas. Several visits later, I was ready to go. Built an apparatus which benefited from excellent in-house glass-blowing capabilities as well as in-house machining. And we made our own flow meters using watch jewels that we mounted inside brass plates, and we calibrated them using known volumes and pressure drops. I actually became quite adept at glass blowing myself. Well, I finished the extensive PhD course requirements in only 3 semesters while I was building the apparatus and initiating my work. And really, 24/7 activity, I completed a number of experimental studies and even performed RKM calculations on the isotope effects that I was measuring experimentally right at the University of Maryland using the computer facilities there. And less than 3 years after entering Catholic University, I obtained my doctorate. Now, in anticipation of receiving a PhD, we actually decided to start our family, and Michelle was born slightly before I got my doctorate. So the next stop in the road, remember Dick had been telling me how important an advanced degree was. Well, he also said, look, if you're going to pursue this, you really want to go and do a postdoc too. Well, I had several opportunities. There was a National Academy-run program that's now run amongst the federal facilities by USRA. So I had that opportunity at the Bureau of Standards. I had an opportunity at Brookhaven National Labs, and one at the University of Washington, which, heaven forbid, if I had gone there, I might have ended up teaching Paul Newman. But at any rate, it was a choice that was really driven by the abundance of contacts that I had already made here in the Washington area. And I've listed the places here, but there's an interesting group here, another acronym. This was a group of scientists from all of these institutions who used to meet every couple months at Georgetown University. The procedure was whoever was going to speak that day had to talk about ongoing research that hadn't been published, wasn't complete, and they would present problems that they were having. They would open up discussion for what next road to pursue, and we labeled it the WACO Pack. It stood for the Washington Area Colloquium on Photochemistry and Chemical Kinetics. Great acronym. I also had the opportunity to work with an incredibly innovative man, Walter Braun, who had just developed a new technique for studying reactions. We implemented improvements. The years at the Bureau as both a postdoc were very exciting times. There was never a lack of interesting things to do. As I say, especially with Walt's innovative brilliance. We published 8 papers during that time. I was given a 1-year temporary appointment. We'll get to that later during Walt's sabbatical. We also developed different experimental techniques. We demonstrated intracavity laser quenching for detection of low concentrations of very weak absorbers, and later even extended that to transient species produced flash photolytically. So it was really there that I began to discover the true joy in basic research. My involvement in the research became more than just a necessary waypoint on a journey. I began to more fully appreciate the tremendous satisfaction that one could have with a new research result, with the thrill of discovery associated with the development of new, improved, or innovative methodologies. Now, here are some of the things. We don't have time. I'll just show you this picture. Here, well, first of all, this is the paper on dye laser quenching. It ended up being a citation classic in the literature. Here is Al Laufer, myself, and another postdoc. This is a flash photolysis apparatus which is set up entirely within a dye laser cavity, and we're able to get enhanced spectra of a lot of free radicals. And by the way, this other postdoc is George Atkinson, who is currently the president of Sigma Chi. Well, my education as a husband also continued at this time, and so for any of the younger people in here, I'm going to give you 2 pieces of advice, okay? The first one, don't attempt to humor a wife who has just realized that she's pregnant only a couple months after she just gave birth to her first child, okay? I had heard some sounds coming from the bathroom, and I asked Mary, is that what I think it is? Followed by, how could you let this happen? She did not think that that was very humorous. But our son Mike was born August 25th. And I think this picture really speaks to the joy, the simplicity, the innocence of that life. The other thing is, if you're going to tell your wife something critical, that's really critical to the family, make sure the time is right. Honey, I just turned down the last of 5 permanent job offers and accepted a 1-year temporary position at the Bureau while Walt is on sabbatical. I thought it was a good idea. Unfortunately, I said this in the spring of '71 when Mary was attempting to change 22-month-old Michelle's diaper while simultaneously nursing 8-month-old Michael. Now, fortunately, her aim was impeded by the second activity, and the diaper missed me. Around that time, there was a path change of my interest to stratospheric chemistry. I'm not going to go into this, but we were now getting observations of ozone profiles throughout the atmosphere, and there was a big interest in the chemistry that was responsible for that. And this led to a paper from Harold Johnson on the possible effects of nitrogen oxides, which in turn led to the Department of Transportation establishing the Climatic Impact Assessment Program, which ran from '72 to '74, and it established a strong foundation for stratospheric research for years to come. I was given an incredible opportunity at that time. As a temporary 1-year employee, I was asked to coordinate the division's proposal to the Department of Transportation. It was a broad sweeping proposal, and I was awarded a 2-year, almost $1 million grant for all of that research, which led me to get a 2-year term appointment. Did a lot of work there. We did, OH kinetic studies. We did a host of investigations looking at the reactions of vibrationally excited ozone, and were able to assess the atmospheric importance. And we initiated a large data evaluation activity, which still continues today under NASA leadership. During SciUp alone, I had another 9 publications, and during the 4.5 years at NBS at that time, I had 19 publications. That made me believe there was no way these people were not going to hire me. And so as SciUp was winding down, I didn't even begin looking for another job, but I did not tell Mary about it this time. Fortunately, I was offered a permanent position with little time to spare, and of course, this was justification for a celebration, and Mindy was born in October, but more important to Michelle and Mike, they got the dog that they wanted. So over that time, as most of you know, there was a broadening of concern about the ozone, dealing with halogen chemistry. We know about Rich Stolarski's work with Ralph Cicerone, who unfortunately just passed away a few days ago. Work of Lovelock, Sherry Rowland, Mario Molina. And all of this led to NASA's FY76 Authorization Act, which gave NASA lead agency authority for stratospheric ozone research and led to the establishment of NASA's Upper Atmosphere Research Program. Fortunate for me, I was able to get extensive funding from both NASA UARP and chemical industry's alternate fluorocarbon environmental acceptability study that enabled me to support collaborations with some incredible senior research associates and also 4 talented undergraduates, each of whom spent 2 summers working in my lab. And I'm very proud to say each one of them left with at least 2 publications. So I really felt good about that. A lot of achievements that we did here in terms of kinetics, photochemistry, spectroscopy, and we're averaging 4 publications a year for a 12-year period. Well, things became difficult, and I began to feel a need for a bit of a course readjustment. I think, quite frankly, I was burning out. I was working 7 days a week in the lab because that was my life. Good advice for a lot of you. That's not your life. It's only part of your life. I had more than 70 publications, received many awards, made a smart townhouse investment that led to purchase of a larger home. I had what I thought was a stable family, a wife, 3 children, and then there was a little oops that came in there. Heard the same telltale signs, but did not decide to make humorous comments. And our daughter Meredith was born on the 4th of July. These high achievements in the lab could not continue indefinitely, and I realized that I was not properly balancing my time. I began getting concerned about the fact that guest researcher departures would result in my becoming a one-man show in the lab, and I really began having a desire to contribute on a larger scale. Well, we talked about serendipity. A good friend of mine who I first met when we were both in doing our postdocs, me at the Bureau of Standards, him at University of Maryland. Bob Watson, who was at NASA headquarters, offered me a program management position at NASA headquarters. He wanted, via an interagency assignment, to fill in while they were doing this first airborne experiment in Antarctica, investigating the ozone hole. Now, it was a pretty significant challenge for a person who only had a background in lab science to manage a program whose primary activities were in the area of atmospheric observations. But I got my feet wet reviewing UARP tasks and laboratory studies, but certainly had to become familiar with the many field activities. Another serendipitous event, Bob asked me to head a US delegation to Russia. It was under these auspices. 3 of the people who I invited to be on this delegation, most of you know. Bill Brune at Penn State, David Fahey from the NOAA labs, and our own Jose Rodriguez. So we went there, and it was a very successful workshop. And I met this guy, Vladimir Orkin, very impressive. I arranged for him to come to an industry workshop and visit NIST. I asked him about the possibility of him coming to NIST as a visiting scientist, and 2 years later, he was able to do that. Later, he became a NIST employee and now runs my former laboratory. His joining the research group is what really enabled me to stay on as a manager of the Upper Atmosphere Research Program. The guy was nothing short of fantastic. He attracted additional senior scientists to NIST, and I believe through his innovativeness, we've advanced our measurement techniques to a state of accuracy and precision that's unequaled anywhere. During my time at NASA headquarters, managing the Upper Atmosphere Research Program, I had the incredible pleasure of working with the science community to plan and implement a whole variety of field measurement campaigns, not just for atmospheric process studies, but also for satellite validation. And I was in the field full-time for every one of these campaigns. But then Bob issued yet another challenge. He said, you got to leave a mark here. Well, but it had to be a positive one. And this was based on the fact that he felt that the time had arrived to implement a new observations program, ground-based observations program, that had been conceptually worked out in a 1986 NASA-NOAA Chemical Manufacturers Association workshop. Things were formalized in 1989. NDSC began official operations in 91. It expanded its focus to NDAC in 95, and for more than 20 years, I served as either chair or co-chair of its International Steering Committee. This year, the network is celebrating 25 years of successful operations in enabling and enhancing global atmospheric research. I've stepped down as a co-chair, and I'm very grateful that Ann Thompson here is one of the two co-chairs now of this network. The network is highlighted as a feature article that Ann, I, and the other co-chair, Martine Nemegère, wrote for the Earth Observer newsletter. It's in the latest issue of Earth Observer. I encourage you to take a look at it. So we're working towards a conclusion here. So let's take a look at what I consider the benefits were of this incredible opportunity that I had for a NIST-NASA appointment. Obviously, I developed a deep appreciation for the breadth and complementarity of NASA's Earth science activities in atmospheric composition, ranging from laboratory research and modeling right through to observations, ground-based balloon, airborne, satellite. The opportunities for my mentoring by renowned atmospheric scientists were obviously enhanced. And I can honestly say that these provided, from my perspective, some of the most broadening and rewarding experiences in my career. This broadening of expertise led to appointments by and to a number of international organizations. I've been chair of WMO UNET meetings of ozone research managers that are prescribed under the Vienna Convention for the Protection of the Ozone Layer. All of these meetings. My research in atmospheric kinetics benefited from this enhanced expertise by providing me a better understanding and appreciation of the role that these data played in the interpretation of a lot of the observations. But it also provided me with an opportunity to advance to the interface between atmospheric research and environmental policy at both the national and international levels. I've had the distinct pleasure to participate initially, right when I first went to NASA, as a reviewer of the 1988 report of the International Ozone Trends Panel. Since then, I've been a reviewer, contributing author, co-author, or co-lead author of chapters in every of the 8 scientific assessments of ozone from 1989 to present. And I was a co-lead author with Ravi Shankara from NOAA of the synthesis and assessment product of the US Climate Change Science Program. Well, after officially transferring from NIST to NASA in 2004, I retired from NASA and US government service in 2008. But, retirement actually became rehirement when I joined UMBC Guest shortly thereafter and USRA Guest Star in 2011. This has provided me with an opportunity to continue with and learning from current and future leaders in atmospheric science over a complete spectrum of activities. And I couldn't be more appreciative of the people who have made this possible. So let's reflect a little bit. I view that one's successes often entail walking in the shadows of great men and women who have paved the road ahead of them. Now, as I look back on my incredible journey, I can't think of a finer group of traveling companions than those with whom I've shared the road and from whose mentoring I have benefited considerably. I believe that on this road, we've changed and will continue to change the course of history in understanding and protecting the Earth's environment by providing a sound scientific basis for national and international policy. And despite what I might have believed initially, my own mentoring never ceased. It didn't cease when I completed my postdoctoral appointment, but has continued throughout my career. And such opportunities for continual learning have played a major role in making my scientific career so enjoyable. And I caution you that if you find that you're not learning, something is wrong. You hopefully will, throughout your career, will continue to learn. I think that's very, very important. Well, I said that, people are going to benefit from this, and I became even more pleased when I saw two of the future beneficiaries of our work, our first two grandchildren, Brittany and Juliana, born 3 months apart to the day. And of course, that's 16 years ago. Well, time has passed. Brittany's now in high school, and as you can see, is quite an accomplished equestrian. Juliana, also in high school, and approximately 6 feet tall. She may be taking after my paternal grandmother, although her father is 6'5", has developed a passion for volleyball. You can see her intensity here, and you can see how high she can, she can jump. But as you're going home, be careful because she has just gotten her learner's permit. Well, simple thanks aren't enough. The font isn't large enough for me to thank my parents. There are all these other people who I've mentioned along the way, and there are the many mentors that I've had at NIST, NASA, especially Goddard, NOAA, the universities, and international agencies. But you're probably saying, I forgot someone. Well, of course. Simply can't forget to include the person whom I apparently first met in the 2nd grade and fell in love with more than 11 years later. She raised 4 magnificent children and is now a friend and role model for 12 incredible grandchildren. And she stood by my side for 50 years. On a more personal note, I could not have completed the last 50 years of my journey without her support. She's my best friend. She's hiked more than 100 miles with me in both hemispheres. She's a fantastic mom on call to our children, and Mimi the Great to our grandchildren. I told you about listening to the Lone Ranger on the radio. He might have been my childhood hero, but Mary's my hero today. Not just for this, but for her strength, courage, and perseverance that she's shown while doing all this and simultaneously waging a successful battle with breast cancer. So this concludes my story about a journey that led to my career in atmospheric science and saw my dream of being a cowboy come to an end. Or did it? Now that I seem to have found a new riding companion. This picture was taken this past September. And so, Mayor, why don't you just stand up and So, I'd like to thank all of you for listening, but more importantly, for being mentors, scientific colleagues, and most of all, friends. Thank you.
We'll take a few comments or questions.
Yeah, Mike, do you consider stratospheric chemistry to be a solved problem now, or is there still work to do?
Well, there's lots of work to do. I mean, the coupling, that was one of the things, and I encourage you to read that Earth Observer article in terms of the enhanced focus that we have in the network, in that ground-based network. You know, the interplay between changing climate and changing atmospheric composition, has a strong bearing on the evolution of the ozone layer. And so there are lots of things that, maybe from a halogen perspective, a lot of what needed to be done has been done, but there are still some subtle aspects that can be done.
Okay, with that, let's thank Mike one more time.